Okay, so obviously I don't exactly know anything more than what I have researched, but I'm trying to take the most non-biased approaches to discern what are the most destructive forces in our world. Well, in the 20th century, I would guess, according to what I have read from multiple sources, we don't know how many people exactly communists have killed, but it is enormous amounts, and definitely more than Hitler was responsible for. And I would say communism caused more misery than fascism based on how many nations it occupied and the number of people killed, and sometimes even the methods that were used against people were quite horrific compared to what even took place sometimes at Auschwitz, in the length of time that these people were tortured and in the manner. I would prefer a gas chamber. Anyhow, a slightly off topic, but the thing is, radical monotheism, I think, would rank second place in the 20th century, definitely ranks first place as the most destructive force in our 21st century, responsible for the most deaths. The reason I would say possibly radical monotheism caused more misery than Nazism or fascism even in the 20th century is because of the amount of nations they occupied, the atrocities of the Ottoman Empire, the genocide, and how many nations they have stripped. Now remember the rule of Saddam Hussein and all those other wars in the Middle East, that was 20th century stuff as well. And, it went on into the 21st century, but, the amount of nations that radical monotheists brainwashed and kept living in fear, the misery that they caused other nations that were scared of these people, the damage that they've done throughout terrorism in the Middle East, the violence and the wars, that they were so upset about Israel taking a little thin strip of land, and they're saying these Jews have stolen our land. Well, that's not true. That land is stolen. The Muslims stole Egypt. The Muslims stole North Africa, and they stole Turkey, and a lot of those places. They went through there doing what they do, doing what Muhammad did, doing what we see them doing in many places, and that is terrorizing people. And it's not just ISIS, it's not just Boko Haram, it's not just the Taliban, it's not just Al-Shabaab or any of these other terrorist groups. It's entire governments that even we are allied with. Saudi Arabia is a terrorist nation. The people there have every reason to be terrified into not speaking the truth. Some guy starts a blog on the internet, not even attacking Islam, just saying our country would be better off if it was more secularized. Not saying we should do away with Islam. He was just saying, it's too darn rigid. And he's got 10 years in prison. Here in America, that's 10 years of your life, in a very bad place. And they sometimes do worse things than that, obviously, to people, just for making a blog, okay, and all the 1,000 lashes. Well, that's the thing. People don't want to lose 10, 20 years of their life or lose their head. So every one of those people in those countries is terrorized into believing what's brainwashed, what's spoon-fed to them, what's forced down their throat. There isn't free speech. There's not freedom in the schools. They're simply brainwashed. And one of the reasons is because the Quran is so irrational and contradicts the golden rule and contradicts a person's conscience and is sometimes incoherent, and because Sharia law is so brutal and barbaric, if you allow people to have free speech, it's not going to survive very well. Okay? And another thing, people, and this isn't just Islam. This is radical monotheism. Okay, what is in the Old Testament is disgusting. And some of it anyways, and thanks be to God that Jesus Christ was a rebel against the Old Testament. You can say all you want, oh, Jesus said he didn't come to do away with the law. Jesus said, I give you a new commandment. He said the entire law rests on this, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, Muhammad has hundreds of over 100 quotes calling people to violence and hatred. You know how many Jesus has? 0. He told people to do the opposite, to love their enemies. Put away your sword. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. That's what he said when they picked up swords to defend him, okay? Jesus said, let those who are without sin cast the first stone. He did away with a lot of things. The New Testament even did away with circumcision, something so important. That's just an example of how the old law was largely, I'm so glad, Christ eventually, did away with something so barbaric and irrational. And that's why I'm so offended that 600 years later, Muhammad brings back those atrocities, those crimes against humanity. And so radical monotheism is the most destructive force on our earth. Imagine a world where that wasn't the case, where people just didn't follow Old Testament garbage and followed the teachings of Jesus Christ. Love God, love your neighbor, feed the hungry, take care of the sick, clothe the naked, whatever, do what you do for the least of my people, you do for me. Follow the golden rule, okay? If everybody was doing that, following the golden rule, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, caring for the sick and feeding the hungry, could you imagine the world we would have? And I admire people like Buddha and Gandhi. I'm not being some Jesus bigot. I'm saying anyone who follows the golden rule. That is awesome. But we need to, these are crimes against humanity. And we cannot be politically correct. The Quran is like Mein Kampf. And you know what? I've heard a lot of imams refer to the Jews as apes. And I just recently found out why they refer to them as apes. Because the Quran refers to Jews as apes. Preaches much hatred, okay, against people like us, and against you if you're a non-Muslim. And then, of course, the Quran, they have to use some peaceful verses. That's the way to do it. If you want to conquer hearts, let's go hacking off heads because the Quran says so, and then let's quote some peaceful verses so that we can say it's a book of peace while we commit our violence throughout the world. And you look at where, if you want to know, is Islam a religion of peace? Is this religion of Islam doing our world any good? Where is the majority of violence and intolerance in our world? The Middle East, Saudi Arabia, North Africa, Sudan, Nigeria, Congo. There's garbage in Turkey. Where are the car bombs going off? Where are little kids recruited to blow themselves up, primarily? Almost always. Okay? Where do you usually see people running around with guns, killing enormous amounts of innocent people in the name of God? Okay? So is Islam doing our world any good? Some Muslims may be doing the world good, but is Islam doing the world any good? Hundreds of millions of women that cannot vote? Cannot leave the house without a man's permission? Lives ruined. No free speech. Islam is doing our world enormous amounts of harm. And we should not look at pure evil and do nothing about it. And the Old Testament, yes, terrible, terrible, disgusting stuff in the Old Testament. But you know what? Look at Israel. That is one nation that has a primary religion, where the primary religion, the biggest religion of the people, is an Old Testament religion. And they live like civilized people compared to Islam. And so, when there is pure evil in the world, we know where the threat is coming from. And let's not be politically correct. And it's not just Islam, it's radical monotheism. But we all know where that is primarily taking place, and we can read the Quran and Sharia law and the hadiths, and we can find out why. God bless you.